The wait is over. Silksong was revealed for the 4th of September and I still don't have this video completed. What the fuck? Hi, hello! Around the 8th of June, I released an announcement that I would play the entirety of Hollow Knight Silksong while cosplaying as the protagonist, Hornet. But how did I get the costume? How did I make the trailer? Well, it all started back in April. First thing I thought was to plan all of this out in 3D first. You'll see why in a bit. So I had a very convenient 3D model of myself at true scale. What? You don't have it? Yeah, you're not weirdos. My suggestion is to get a rough shape of your proportions on DAZ 3D, export it to Blender and measure yourself out using the measure tool. Since my model was very rough, I decided to delete the head entirely and instead take 3 photos of myself from 3 different axes, cut them out in Blender and use those for reference, giving us this. Online there are various models of Hornet, but none were as close as the original 2D design as this one. Its topology was unusable, and so, after some adjustments, it's Retopology time! This was my true first Retopology, so I was a little slow and rough with it, but in the end it turned out pretty well. Once completed, I selected edges to become future scenes in the foam and adjusted the UV map as if it were a sewing pattern. Did some very rough points so I knew how it would connect, and after printing this out on a piece of paper, I had a working mini prototype, but it wasn't enough to test if I got their sizes right. So I adjusted the pattern so it would fit on less paper, and through an arduous battle with software, I scaled it up so it would match the scale I had in Blender. I used the opening of the eye to scale it correctly. I printed out the pattern onto multiple pages, cut them out and taped them together, and cut out half a mask in cardboard and tried it on. It was a success! It fit my head perfectly. I was so happy, but I wasn't done. This was just the beginning. Now you probably can't see much of anything here, since it was a very sunny day when I started this, so I'll narrate over what I am doing. Here I started by tracing all the printed out patterns with some guides and remembering to do it twice, since this time I was gonna build two halves instead of one like I did with the cardboard. Next up, I went in and cut the pattern out. To make sure I was precise, I used a ruler to help myself with the straight lines. Now all the edges looked pretty rough, so I decided they could receive a little hand of sanding. However, the result wasn't the greatest. In the end, I decided most of these seams would either not be a problem or just be fully covered by foam clay anyway. Now here's the funny thing, immediately after the sun finally moved and the camera could see again, it started having problems with overheating, and so I lost some footage. So first I glued the ends of the two halves so they were ready to receive the horns, then I immediately moved on to gluing the two halves together. More on how this was done later. I went nice and steady with applying glue, didn't really know how much to place, so I went with lots. After each application, as I have learned from Kamui cosplays, I put up a timer of 3 minutes before gluing the two parts together. The horns were a little hard to piece together, and I would suggest either having a friend help you out or use a heat gun to shape the foam before applying the glue. The last and hardest part was gluing the horns to the head. This is why I highly recommend you all to glue the horns to their respective half first, then gluing the halves together. Once it was all dry, I did another test fit to make sure it was all fine, and yep, it was all good! Ah, this is so exciting! For the needle, I haven't really painted out anything because, well, it was a very simple geometric shape. For the handle, I used a PVC rod, and since the one available was longer than what I needed, I just put it inside the blade to give it a rigid core. However, it was not long or thin enough to make the whole blade, so I also inserted a little branch I previously cut and sanded for the thinner part of the blade. Looking back, I should have used a bit of foam to better aid the distinction between the two cores, as it was bending quite a bit, but I ended up fixing it down the line. For the eye of the needle, I tried my best to cut out 2 circular pieces, because I had a brilliant plan in mind. Since the blade was way too bendy, I thought I could add 2 more layers of foam to the blade. Spoiler, it didn't help in the slightest, so I had to do surgery in the end. here is the part that I regret the most. Foam clay. I wanted to close gaps and make the horns and the mask a little better, but the result was just a mess. I also wanted to use mostly foam clay to create the eye of the needle, which, spoiler, it looked awful. I thought I would have been able to easily close all the gaps with this and just sand down the rest without any problems. This started a pretty bad period for me. I removed a lot of the foam clay with a knife and the needle actually looked alright, but the eye was looking terrible. When I got to the mask, I really understood that foam clay wasn't the best option, and the sanding paper I had kept destroying everything. So here you really can see me defeated. But it got worse. I figured the problem was the sandpaper. I did some research and thanks to many threads online determined that a 200-ish sandpaper should have worked. And it did. But it was so fine I would have had to sand for a year just to get everything smooth. As you can see, I really didn't know what to do. Maybe it was too much for me. Maybe I did too much. Maybe I had wasted it all. A month went by without any progress. But we're so back! I have no video of what happened next, but my father gave me a circular sander and went to town with it. Additionally, I started removing all of the foam clay I previously added. Yes, I ruined some of the surfaces as you can see, but at least it looked much better than before. And hey, you can always say these are details, little happy accidents.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
For the needle, I cut it in half right at the point where the rod and branch met. Added a ring of foam around the branch so it would stabilize the branch in the center and allow for more area of the rod to be glued in, and then just poured cement over it and inside it. Now, yes, it looks worse with a bit of a gap, but hey, it doesn't wobble anymore, and for a 2-meter long sword, that's a win for me. For the eye, I straight up ripped it out. It looked too horrible, and no matter how much sanding, it would still have been too ugly. And so I went and bought a polystyrene circle of the exact size I needed. Thank gods it existed. And cemented it to the rod. It melted a bit, but I didn't think too much of it. And yet again we discovered that I am in fact an idiot. After that, I wanted to get a thick coat over the entire thing, so maybe most of the gaps would be covered or fixed. Yeah? And honestly, it worked pretty well. Not had I made the foam clay mess, this would probably have fixed all the issues I had beforehand. However, when I went and applied it to the polystyrene, yeesh, it started to bubble. But it's gonna be fine. On the next coat it was not fine. Reading through the instructions on the can, I noticed that, in fact, it would melt polystyrene. But yeah, first coats on the rest of the project. Fit test. I had to go back and buy another polystyrene circle, in fact the only one left. Good gods, the laugh. And I surrendered myself to using the dreaded technique. Yup, we covered it in layers of paper mache. But hey, that worked! The polystyrene was fully secure and safe from the spray coats. Speaking of which, after a couple of coats, the project was pretty much done! Okay, we're at the last steps. We have this thing, I guess.
and this massive sword that I don't know how to fit in anything. But the last steps are taking these, which are a black pantyhose that I will use. I cut off the leg parts and close them with hot glue, and now I will do the same but attaching it inside the head. Let's see how it goes.
And it goes freaking swell past me. And so, with everything ready, it was time to work on a trailer.
Yay, super high quality. I just finished recording the trailer. Everything was fine. And then of course we had a little accident. Stuff like this happens when you create a fucking 2-meter long sword. Oh well. Guess I'll have to deal with this another time.
It breaking wasn't really an issue. In fact, having it hinged like that would allow me to finally store the damn thing vertically, occupying much less space than before. Then it was just a matter of recording the music and up in DaVinci Resolve we go! The first thing I did was adjust the recording so it matched what I had planned and added music. Then I applied a depth map filter to get a black and white film I could use later in Blender to get the right deformation, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Then I tried using DaVinci also to remove the background. Note to self, even though DaVinci is pretty good, having a better background would help a ton. In the end, even trying it out on Blender, I was unsatisfied with it. And so we come to the last hurdle. I tried using After Effects instead, and I got a much better result. I was at it for an hour and a half, and then disaster struck. I never saved. My stupidest decision by far, all lost, unretrievable. I was so utterly mad that I had to scream for a while. But I didn't quit. Updated DaVinci, better tools but slower. 3 hours later I had it again. And straight to Blender I went. Saving it as a sequence of TIFF files allowed me to have alpha, and so I had a plane that had my video with transparency playing on it. Recreated the camera and resolution using orthographic so I wouldn't have to change size perspective during the animation, and then it was playing time. On the same plane I added a depth node geometry node setup that I learned from this video here, link in the description. Adjusted it for the scene and boom, myself of the past was interacting with 3D lights and smoke. Then it was about recreating the scene in 3D and adding some Hollow Knight-esque scenery. At first I thought about copying the floor I had in the video, but it didn't work as I wanted, so instead I followed the curvature of the depth map and it worked much better. Some polyheaven textures later and it looked ready to go, but the concaveness looked wrong. So I adjusted the curve and it looked much more natural. Added some fading to the background and it was perfect. Lastly, it was about animating the heat coming closer, some heat distortions, sparks, and the finale! I did all that in one day. I was exhausted, and then I discovered that Summer Game Fest would be right that night, so I rushed and rushed while getting barely any sleep, and in the end... was certainly a wild journey. It made me appreciate people doing cosplays and personas all the more. You guys are more than awesome. I also learned a ton of stuff, both textile things, how to use foam to create cosplays, and what materials to use, where, etc. If you like my story, or wanna support me for all the hard work I have done, I put up a little goal for donations on my Ko-Fi. You can also get yourself the pattern for the mask on my Ko-Fi. It has the final pattern for you to use, a PDF version to print it at the same size as mine, and a blend file of the mask so you can scale it to the right size. And if by magic, by the time this goes out, it's already fulfilled, consider supporting me on Ko-Fi or on Throne to help me grow as a creator and allow me to dive into more projects like these in the future. Else, if you like more devious content, check out my Subscribe star. That's all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed seeing my process, and bye for now.